Yep.
We are live! Finally! You would think we would have this figured out by now, but that's okay.
That's all right. It's
Um,
not that science.
Yeah, we have some, it is what it is. And so, for now, this is Drinks with Amy. I am Amy.
And I'm Derek, as always, having drinks with Amy. And we have a lot of guests today, so we should probably get around to introducing everybody, including you have your sister with you.
Yeah, hi. Emily's visiting from Katy City, so that's very exciting.
Yep.
Cool.
Been here since Monday. I leave Saturday. So.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah. And Katy is here.
Hello.
And Monica.
Hello.
We have Monica on her phone.
Yep.
So today we're talking about gender identity, which is a really broad topic, so we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Before we jump in, Amy, what are you drinking?
I am drinking whiskey and ginger ale. Emily is drinking
Hell or High watermelon. It's watermelon beer.
I've had that. It is okay.
And water from a mason jar.
Nice. Excellent. I am drinking bourbon. I am drinking bullet bourbon and a little bit of club soda. Just a
Dash.
just a touch to soften it a little.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Katie, do you have a beverage?
I do. I've got a Oh no, it's not caffeine free. That's
Not caffeine free. Uh-oh.
no.
Uh-oh.
Caffeine free Diet Dr Pepper. But I guess I'll go with this though. I got this little bit of Jameson, but I just moved, and so it's really unnaturally warm to me because I'm not nice yet. So
Wow.
I'm trying.
All right.
I have coffee. Good old coffee.
Good old coffee.
Nice.
Caffeinated coffee?
That's right.
Wow. That's hardcore.
Mm.
Awesome.
Yeah, coffee after 3, and I'm pretty much up for the rest of the night. So
Come from my military days.
okay.
Gotcha. Awesome. So, Monica, do you want to start by telling us what you do and a little bit about who you are?
Sure. So I am transgender, obviously black transgender woman. And then the work I do is a lot about opening people's minds. I kind of view it as a type of decolonization of the brain. And that's a lot of work. So I've been doing this for about maybe about 15, 20 years now. It's difficult work, but the joy that you can actually get. Now and then you'll get somebody who will say, I just didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the work I do.
And when you say decolonization of the brain, what does that mean?
I'll give you a good example. When you go into a space, so I was in Las Vegas last year, and I went into a place in the family area,
Mm-hmm.
and it was me and my friend went in there. I was just getting some chicken, and the look on the people's faces like, oh my God, what is that? And I had to say, you don't know? I'm transgender. And it's like they were their first, at least it appeared to be their first encounter of somebody who is trans. Not a clue. I mean, so that's kind of the thing. So my goal is when people are sitting at their dinner tables, that somebody say, hey, you know what I saw today? And they have that conversation. Yeah.
So by decolonization of the brain, you mean
Changing people's minds. Oh,
opening people's minds?
opening their minds. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. And how do you primarily do that work right now?
First of all, through presence, having the courage to go in a place that I wouldn't typically go to. I wouldn't go to a Republican convention necessarily. But going to places such as I live here in Richmond, so that's the first thing. Living in Richmond, California, I encounter a lot of people who are just not there yet, or for that matter, I may meet somebody who is not out yet, which I have encountered people who are not out yet, so they're coming out. And so now that I meet somebody who's trying to come out, sees me, and they got the courage to somehow come out because they know somebody else has done it. And that's in Richmond, which is very different from Berkeley.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
Very excited. Katy, what's up with you?
Sure. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I am I have, like a lot of us, lots of different titles and jobs right now. So one, I'm a New Testament scholar. So I have a PhD in New Testament from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. So I'm a researcher, and one of my research topics is gender identity, specifically transgender identity. Although I'm not transgender myself. So I'm not operating from lived experience, but I'm operating from all the wonderful people that I meet and are willing to talk to me. Second, I'm also a pastor, so I'm the associate minister at First Christian Church of Chico in a part-time capacity, and I'm also the minister of women's ministries for my denomination's regional body, which is Northern California and Nevada, in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And I'm super happy to announce that we're a trans-inclusive group now, and so last year we started being explicitly trans-inclusive, and that's a trend that I hope will continue, and I'm waiting for men's ministries to also learn from us so they can also start being intentionally trans-inclusive.
Awesome. And then, so Monica is also Disciples, and Monica, I accidentally muted you, and now I can't unmute you. Oh. Shit. The hell? How did that happen?
With too much power, Amy.
Oh! Great power comes great opportunity to mess up. Monica, is it possible for you to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Can she unmute on her end?
What did I do? Now I'm sweating. So hard right now. No. This isn't working. Uh-oh, now I turned off your video, too. Is there anything you can do from your end?
While we're, Amy, while you're working on this, Katy, can I ask you some questions?
Sure, you bet.
So can we just talk, like, kind of some 101 gender identity kind of definition kind of questions? Like, because I feel like so as a cisgendered person, I feel like, well, okay, so I just used the word cisgendered, and I feel like that even of itself is a term that a lot of people don't know. And when we're talking about transgendered trans people, we often like kind of use it as an adjective. Some people use it as a noun, and I feel like there's just a lot of particularly with people who are wanting to have their minds open, there's a lot of fumbling over like terminology. So can we just like get some terms clear and like basics, so we have some basics, so we can have some open-hearted conversation?
Yeah, you bet. And I still learn new terms all the time, so I'm sure I'll learn some tonight. Hopefully we all will. And new terms are emerging all the time, so no one watching this should feel poorly if you don't know what a vocabulary word means, right? So it's just an opportunity to go to Urban Dictionary and figure it out. And I faked my way through like an entire conversation once, not knowing what the word cisgender meant, probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I was in an audience where I was just too embarrassed to ask what it meant, and so because I was supposed to be kind of an expert, so you fake it till you make it. So so cisgender are people who are assigned either male or female at birth, and their gender when they're an adult or an older adolescent matches that same identity. So when I was born, the doctor said I was a girl. I identify now as a female, so I've never transgressed, or if that's the right word, kind of gone across that barrier. Not a barrier, gone across that identity. So let me toss the ball back to someone else, though, who might want to give another definition or a new definition for a new word.
I mean, what?
Still working this out.
I mean, what you're saying is basically what I've heard as well as a definition for cisgender, and kind of, I don't know, it feels like the easiest explanation of it. And then, so I feel like the other point of confusion for a lot of people is when someone is going from maybe their assigned gender to the gender that they feel is their gender of comfort and their natural gender, what do we describe? What do we use to describe them? Like a man going from being born and assigned as a man to going to being a woman. We call them a transgendered woman. We call them a woman.
Right.
I feel like that's also a point of confusion / tension for people.
Yeah, definitely. And just for terminology's sake, and this is difficult to learn if you're just jumping into this terminology. So trans woman is someone who currently identifies as a woman, even though their sex assigned at birth may have been male. And a trans man is someone who identifies now as a man, even though their sex assigned at birth may have been female. So we always end with the preferred gender identity now. Right. And so that makes things a little easier. And sometimes we can just drop the trans, someone's a man or a woman.
Right.
It can be just as simple as that. And there's lots of nuances in between as well. So everyone gets to choose what they're called.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what our physical anatomy is. We get to make decisions like that, which is kind of cool these days.
Yeah.
And there's also gender queerness, which is sort of somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
With gender-neutral pronouns.
Yeah, and so I worked at Antioch College in Yellow Springs in Ohio. Very, very, very progressive school with a very kind of radical progressive history. And it was the first time that I heard a lot of this conversation really being brought up. And I was blown away by the expressions of pronouns and how much of an issue pronouns were, because there's he and her, then there's they, but then there are also sort of this other range of pronouns that people use to describe themselves. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, everyone's going to be familiar with she and her, and he and him. And then some gender-neutral pronouns that have emerged are, for instance, ze and zir. So those are new, kind of invented, very creative pronouns that some people choose for themselves. I think more common these days is they and them, which even though most people are used to hearing that as referred to groups of people, some people adopt to be a singular pronoun because it is gender neutral, right? And so, for cisgender people, that feels very awkward sometimes the first time you call a single person they or them, but I promise it only feels strange for about 2 seconds, and then you get used to it. So we just have to make a conscious effort to use the pronoun that the person asked. Something, since I just moved, I don't know if I have it handy, but I have a button somewhere, and around Pico, when we're at very gender-inclusive gatherings, people wear little buttons that say what their preferred pronouns are, and it's very, very handy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, if you want to continue with this line of questioning.
Oh no, I just wanted to point out that like there are lots of situations in which we say they about singular people, and I feel like we've blown this particular inconvenience of saying or whatever it is, like the awkwardness of saying they for a single person. I feel like it's really overblown. I think there's lots of circumstances in which we say they meaning one person, and I don't know. It just kind of feels like why is that such a difficulty for people? So.
And if you still have an old grammar book and you were corrected about this over and over and over as a child, you can just scratch that rule out now, and it's really satisfying. You can tell your elementary school teachers that they were wrong.
Oh man, that's tempting.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could speak to sort of how you read the Bible.
Sure.
So that Oh, hi, Monica.
Hi, I'm back.
Hey.
So I was just asking Katy to tell us a little bit about, like, in her New Testament scholarship, how you read the Bible and how that may be different from a traditional understanding.
Sure. Yeah. And so I read the Bible very seriously because I am a person of faith, right? So I don't want to give away the impression that I take the Bible very lightly or that I'm not serious about the faith that it communicates to me, because that's certainly not the case at all. However, I don't read it literally. And in fact, once you really start reading, that becomes really difficult, right? Because the Bible does not say the same thing across the books and across its pages. So I think the gift of the Bible is that it gives us a plethora of voices and lots of different points of view, and sometimes they diverge with one another. So I like to get in there and in the mix and see what is the conversation that people are having, and why is one book saying this and one book saying that, and they're saying kind of different things. So I read the Bible, I would say primarily, actually, historically. So I'm trying to figure out who said what, when, and why. I don't stop there, though, because that's a little bit boring. So I also read for people today. What is the Bible? It's a living, I believe that it's a living document. What are where is the lifeblood in the Bible that informs people of faith, or even people not of faith today? Because it's certainly an influential book. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And so those are some of the reasons why I feel like I've kind of dedicated my adult life to this calling, right, to be an interpreter of the Bible, not for people, but with people. So my strategy is to read the Bible with sort of this traditional who, what, when, and where, but also with an eye for what's between the lines that's not being said that we can also lift out for liberation today, for sources of inspiration, for people to live their lives. So we're not bound by the Bible, but we can become inspired by it.
Yes. And how does your understanding of who God is inform the work that you do as an ally?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, I think, my understanding of who God is certainly expands all the time and with every conversation that I have. And that's really, for me personally, a huge gift of this work that I'm doing around transgender identity, because I interview trans Christians, trans Jews, trans sort of spiritual but not religious people all the time. And their understanding of God informs my understanding of God. So I think, God's certainly male and female, but a whole lot more. So that certainly does not define the totality of God. God's probably also genderqueer and a bunch of other things we haven't thought of yet. right? That God has not yet revealed to us.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I would say my primary understanding of God is that God is love, and the understanding of God as love, as sort of radical, unconditional love, prompts me to not only do this work, but to look in Scripture to see where I find those examples of unconditional love. And I'm looking for them specifically around issues of gender identity, but they're certainly not limited to that.
And when you think of the word God, does that have a gender?
Well, I do. I've worked really hard to get rid of the Charlton Heston kind of God image from the Ten Commandments in my own life, and with students I encounter this all the time. I'll ask them to sort of visualize God in their head, and if they visualize an old white guy with a long beard, then we work really hard to deconstruct that. And so I did that work probably 20 years ago, and I'm glad I did. So now, Amy, I've forgotten the original question. What was your question?
Well, just does God have a gender to you?
Oh, right. I would say yes and no. Yeah, so certainly yes. And that sometimes we sort of might need a gendered figure to give us a little swift kick in the butt, right? So sometimes God is like a mom who's reminding me to clean my room, clean house, whatever it may be. Not that only moms can do that, but that particular image might work for a lot of people. But I think sometimes God has for me a broader gendered or no gendered feel is not the right word. It's that essence that can't quite be captured in words.
Gotcha.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm going to come back to the gender of God question in a little bit. But first, Monica's back.
Yay.
So, Monica, we were talking a little bit about like terminology and sort of things that everyone should know about trans people and how to be with trans people. So we talked about what cisgender means. We talked about what transgender means. We talked about preferred pronouns and gender-neutral pronouns.
Right.
So I don't know if there's anything you would want to add to that sort of part of things.
Because labels and categories are part of colonization, and so they've been around for like 300 plus years. Teaching people or sharing with people that I'm just not a male or female, but we're actually beyond that. It's very challenging because I get it. So academically we can get it, philosophically we can get it, but when you're at the local Safeway, that's when it really gets difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Because folks have to have somewhere to put you.
Yeah.
Well, are you a male or female? So there's no, from my experience, there seemingly is very little comprehension beyond colonized or the normative communications.
Yes.
And so people get really insulted because, wait a minute, if you can't have babies, how can you be a woman? I mean, it gets to that level.
Yeah. And that extends, that colonization extends to our understanding of God, too.
Very much so. For me, I figure, you know what, I really don't know God. I mean, that's a scary thing to say sometimes. But the willingness to say that, I don't know who God is. I have a witness of who God might be, but I don't know God. Therefore, the need to put God as a he or she or whatever, which I get the need to categorize even God, is so necessary. And if you queer the categories, then you wind up in a place you might not want to be. So it's a very, even in the church, the reality that the church is still itself needing some type of rehabilitation. And I think that's why it's going through what it's going through, because the need to break away from the colonizing effort of the folks I'll say white supremacy just to kind of give it a place to stay. It's more than that, but that's just a place to rest. It's very challenging. So it's a generational thing that has to occur.
Yeah. And, you know, when I think of colonization, I think back to 313 CE when Constantine converted to Christianity, and Christianity became a tool for empire through the Romans. Not that that's not even the first example of colonization in the Bible at all. The Israelites were a colonized people. But for me, it's important to understand that the Christianity of Christ and what Christ was talking about was co-opted a long time ago. And what we practice today is the result of further mutation of that original sort of kidnapping, so to speak, of Christian teaching. So I really appreciate you bringing the colonization idea into the conversation, because it's so crucial and critical and central to how we organize, categorize, and even process our own experience to a certain degree. And for those of us who fit into all the boxes easily, or have never had to sort of confront any of those or be limited by any of those boxes or categorizations or colonizations, it can be kind of mind-boggling to go, wait a second, this society, this system that we're in doesn't work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think if we really read the Bible, if we really read the words of Jesus, it's impossible for me to read the words of Jesus and not understand sort of liberation theology, this idea that Jesus came to liberate anyone who's oppressed.
Right.
That's an oversimplification, but anyway. Yeah.
But I think, I mean, just to piggyback on that, I think there's, and I would ask this for both Monica and Katie, there really is something that I'm hearing, Monica, particularly in your statements here about decolonization. There really is something here about liberation that that so many of what we have, so many of the things, so many of the categories that we've considered to be norms are actually little prison cells to keep us in order, to keep their boundaries made to keep us in order. And there's something, I don't know, just can you speak to, I mean, does liberation theology play a big role in the work that you do? Is that something that's formative for what you're doing, and how does it translate into the work that you do?
And me? Oh, Monica? Okay.
Yes.
Liberation theology for me is, so I see Jesus as that premier activist who went to the cross to liberate myself, my soul, and who I am. That's who Jesus is for me. And so, of course, how do you live that out? Well, you have to be, I don't want to use the word authentic, but you have to be you.
Yeah.
You know, it's like saying, so then, I mean, recognizing, at least for me, that Jesus came to free the captives, to set the people free from those cardboard boxes that we're supposed to live in. And most of that is for power, of course. Power, categories relate to power, you know, and these days, money and profit. Jesus says, no, be you. Because Jesus was authentic and Jesus was himself, he was able to fully function in the power of God. And that's how I read the Bible. When you're authentic, you have real power. Now, it may get you knocked off, but, and it scares people to death because, oh, you got power. But I would say I'm not doing anything different than other activists that might do, who seek just to be who they are. Be themselves, not fit in somebody else's box, because God is not about cardboard boxes. And Jesus came for us to recognize that, to set the captives free. And then you go back to the Old Testament, you find, God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. And so for me, the Bible is very much, in the life of Jesus, very much about liberation. Very much about being free. And the practical applications of liberation are mental health. Because you have mental health, we're not trying to be somebody else. And I think sometimes that's the premier problem of our country today, that nobody's trying to be themselves. They're all trying to be somebody else, and we're running into mental health issues.
Absolutely.
So liberation is also about mental health.
That's really good.
And spiritual health.
Exactly.
So, Katy, how much does liberation theology play into your...
Well, I want Monica's answer. So, I want Monica's answer. For me, it's always in the background. Let's see. When I was in seminary, I mean, Rosemary Radford Ruther was one of my teachers my first year in seminary. So my kind of first adult theology classes were with people who were very much practicing liberation theology. In work of gender identity, I would say I've got this nice handy book in front of me, so Transformations, and it's edited. One of the editors is Marcella Althus-Reed, who's South American and works with liberation theology. She died a couple of years ago, but she was one of the women, I think, who was doing that most successfully. Liberation theology has been dominated by a lot of men who haven't always taken women's experiences, cisgender men who haven't always taken women's experiences into account. And so I would say that she helped break through some of those barriers. I feel like liberation theology informs what I do. It's in the background of what I do, but I'm kind of a middle-class white girl from the suburbs, and I lack some of that lived experience to really understand some of the more critical dimensions of liberation theology, especially around issues of extreme poverty and of racism. So I rely on others to inform me of that kind of work, and know that their voices are influencing what I do, and hopefully vice versa. But I want to be really honest about that too, because I don't want to claim experiences that I don't have. Right? So those they inform me. They've shaped me, but more as an adult than as a child or an adolescent. Right? So the barriers that I've had to break through are different barriers.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And they're real, but they're not quite as extreme, I think, within the world that we occupy.
Mm-hmm. So when you find yourself in a room of straight, cisgendered people,
Mm-hmm.
heterosexual, cisgendered people, what's the sort of attitude or mindset that you bring into the room? Do you feel like you're able to bring the voices of sort of the transgendered experience into the room? Or do you find yourself like really trying to open conversations and open minds to include your understandings, having done the work that you've done?
I definitely bring the voices with me as much as I can, depending on what the topic is of the day, right? So, I don't. The communities that I tend to work with the most, my local church community, my in women's ministries, I'm very open about the research that I do. Very grateful to my senior pastor here in Chico, and probably a year ago, a year and a half ago, I said, oh, I'm doing this work on transgender identity. Is that something? Can I be public about that? And he said, we don't hide anyone under a bushel. So yes, be public. And so I'm very grateful for that. And so I would say most people, cisgender, transgender, genderqueer, are trying to live their lives and do it the best way that they can and get through the day. And if I take that seriously, and most people are, you do have hateful people that do really horrible things. Most people are not trying to, right? Most people are just trying to live their lives and understand the world the best that they can and pay the bills and do all that. So if I take that seriously, most people are naturally curious, and what I found, especially among sort of middle class heterosexual, especially white people, is that they don't know how to ask the questions in a polite way, and that's their biggest barrier. And if they feel like they're going to be rude, then they're silent, right? So I think a lot of the work I do is giving people a vocabulary to be able to have the conversation. And in that sense, yes, I bring the voices that I can with the people that I've spoken to, direct quotes as much as possible if I'm not violating anyone's identity or anonymity. Then I bring their direct experiences to the conversations, and people are really glad. So in Chico, Chico is 3 hours north of Sacramento. We're at the very north end of the California Valley. There's Chico State in the city. It's about 100,000 people. So it's sort of a progressive college community with a lot of, but as soon as you leave Chico, it's very rural, very agricultural. So we have a weird kind of mixture. We're kind of like a brackish water here in the state of ideologies and political opinions, all that kind of stuff. My church hosted the Trans Awareness Week, training. So we hosted like the medical, the social work, the therapeutic training, and part of that was a faith component. Well, all the people that are, this population that we've described, sort of middle class, heterosexual, that came to the training were just blown away. They loved it. And they finally had a vocabulary to talk about issues of gender identity that they did not have growing up. So, in that kind of work, I try to use my privilege among those communities as much as I can to give people sort of tools for their own gender journey. And what they find out is that they do have a gender journey. They haven't always had the language to talk about that.
Nice. So my next curiosity is about, it's my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, but it's my understanding that you two are working together to, like you said earlier, kind of create a trans-inclusive understanding of women's ministries, particularly. And I'm just curious about, like, if there are people out there who are like, oh, I want to do that, what you would say to them about any resources or sort of where to start or anything like that.
Monica, I want to fist bump you there. Okay.
So resources begin. Well, there are two areas of resources. One is relationship, and the other one is reading. So a lot of times, a good example. So I'm a clergy person and a disciple of Christ. I had to go through a process. Well, when I went through the process, of course, I had to sit around at a table with folks who didn't have a clue about transgender. Not a clue. So I had to establish a relationship. So over the months, I kind of established a relationship. They got to know me. And then I said, I have a book coming out. And so not only did they know me as a human being, I mean, it had to be really critical to understand we're human beings here. And is a human being who has a book coming out on transgender stuff. And like, really? So it really changed the conversation because they had some way to connect. But at the same time, one of the greatest resources is grace. So I had to, for a while ago, I had to go through a process where I had to think in the other person's shoes. Suppose I wasn't transgender. Suppose I was just a regular black male doing my thing. If I wouldn't, would I have the words or understanding to know what transgender was? So I really had to rethink that. So grace is a significant resource from both for all of us when it comes to education and transitioning into a much more diverse humanity, on the real. And so then when I give the book, and I think if I'm not mistaken, you can't give folks too much because they'll throw it up. So you gotta give a little bit here, a little bit there, and then allow the people to ask you questions. And if they ask questions about, well, why would you want to do that? Don't get mad. Just say, you know, you this is the great way of coming from a faith perspective, because you can say, well, this is my faith in operation. This is, and you don't, you may not be able to go into the whole process, but you give them a little bit of what you had to go through, just a snippet, a Reader's Digest version. And I've done that, and people come back, I just didn't know that, and they want to know more.
And what is your book?
The first book was Reflection of a Prophet Without Honor, and the second book is Authenticity and Imagination in the Face of Oppression.
And can we buy those books?
Well, Reflections is online now. It's on Amazon.
Okay.
Authenticity and Imagination, I'm actually doing the final edits on it now.
Awesome.
And so it's about being, it comes from a transgender perspective, but it's very much about queer. For me, queer means you being all of who you are. And that's what you're supposed to be. Because if you, like I said earlier, the idea is to be authentic, and then developing strategies to live out your authenticity. So an example of that would be the club. So when the Orlando massacre occurred, I was mindful that when I came out, the club was my strategy to find out who I was. It wasn't about sex. No, it was about who am I? What am I going through? And it was at the club that I met my first transgender group who took me to church.
Cool. So
clubs are a type of strategy that folks who are LGBTQ or who just don't fit into the norm or whatever, to figure out what's going on, to develop those relationships, those, for me, I'll say Christ-centered relationships, but they're probably going to be Buddhist or whatever.
Right.
But it's really finding out who you are and where you fit at and what you're about. And that's a strategy, because when you go outside the club, it's ugly sometimes.
Yeah.
And so the club is one that gave me at least the strength to recognize that everybody's different and a child of God. And that's why I learned that in the club. Not in the church. I didn't learn it in church.
Right.
I'm in Virginia. I was in Virginia, so of course. No, the church is not available, but the club was.
So I guess for both of you, what is? I mean, on one hand, like I don't want to take away that role that the club can play, but how can the church be a bigger part of being that for people as well? I mean, I think, in light of, I think with all of the, I think with all the things that have been going on with bathroom legislation lately, I think the trans community is in people's awareness in a way that it hasn't been before. And I think people are starting to ask questions. What can we do to make our churches more trans inclusive, more LGBTQ inclusive? So, I mean, what can the church do for those folks who are really struggling with gender identity?
You want to answer that there, Katy?
I'll sort of answer from Yeah, I think there's definitely steps that can be taken. The sort of practical baby steps for churches who want to become more inclusive and more trans aware is to have just a basic sensitivity training. I mean, that's really nuts and bolts, but it's really important. So contact your local LGBTQ resource center. They'll probably send someone out for very low cost or maybe even for free and give the church a 2-hour, this is what transgender means. This is what cisgender means. This is why bathroom issues are, bathrooms are important. This is what's at stake. This is the risk of violence. My experience is that when churches who are mostly cisgender, full of cisgender people, when they understand, they may not ever understand at their core what transgender is because it's not part of their lived experience. They really will understand risk and violence. And statistics speak really loud numbers. And your average church lady who's older, been going to church their whole life, will go home and they will pray for those people. And it's that prayer that will transform them. Right? And so giving people the opportunity to be in prayer for people that they don't know, I think is actually really powerful. So that's a nuts and bolts way to do it. I've been talking about this in my church for about a year. I started in the newsletter, because in the newsletter I'm supposed to put what I'm doing research on. So I put a little paragraph in here and there. Oh, I'm doing research on gender identity. Oh, well, what does gender identity mean the next month? Oh, well, it means this. Oh, why am I doing this? So every month I just had a new little paragraph just to very slowly introduce people to what I'm doing. And, it's sort of culminated foreign relationships with our local Stonewall Alliance, the local LGBTQ Resource Center. I'm a volunteer there. And that sort of culminated after a year and a half in us being the host for trans awareness training. So at that training, of course, we had all gender bathrooms. But I would say for the average church, you're not going to go straight from this conversation to having like all gender bathrooms without a lot of in-between steps. And I think to me, it's very damaging to say to a lot of trans people out there, hey, our church is trans inclusive, come on in. And then if that church is not ready for it, those people might experience trauma and harm, right? So I hate to tell people to take things slowly because we're not at that point. I mean, I'm at the point where I'm like, no, let's just be all inclusive all the time. Let's do this. But I also don't want to traumatize anyone. So, as far as I know, there's not a lot of great how-to guides out there. Now, please correct me if I'm people who are watching this and I'm wrong and you wrote the good guide. Send it to me. I'll put it on my blog. All right. So I don't want to speak ill. But this is new for a lot of people. Within women's ministries within my denomination, I took this position about 14 months ago, and at our first council meeting, I said, y'all, the day was here about a long time ago to talk about trans women in our events. When that question comes up, because it's when, not if, what's our answer? And I report to the council. They don't report to me. They tell me what to do, And so I was so proud of them because they all said, without a question, trans women are invited and included. What do we need to do to make that clear? So one way we make it clear, and I can tell you in a year how successful it is I just put a little trans flag on all of our flyers, and I say this is a trans inclusive event. And that flag speaks much more than I could. Right? And so, we take the necessary steps to make sure that the spaces are safe.
Very cool.
So start small. Don't be fearful.
Yeah.
Go in faith, go in love, do no harm. Email me for other suggestions. I'm learning as I go, right? So now that's me speaking from the sort of pastoral, ministerial, administrative, cisgender perspective. I bet that trans Christians have a lot better ideas about what churches could be doing.
Yeah. It's interesting because so I started an MCC Metropolitan Community Church, and believe it or not, there was a bathroom in the gay church. So a bathroom issue right there. So it's cisgender churches, but it's really no, things should be this way, and I have a problem. That kind of attitude. Um, but it is by those small steps. Because Kay was right about it is about small steps. And I say you can't give folks too much because they'll throw it up. You got to be very, very small steps. So I actually really started with the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, because they had a faith component. This was some years ago. And he had gathered all of the trans folks together, well, maybe about 20 of us together. We put a book together about transgender inclusion for the church, and for communities of faith. And we actually had it online, and we sent it out. But we also had to do partnering with certain communities of faith to give it flesh. It's not just a book; it's a real person. And the work is very slow. It's got to be slow but consistent work. And so right now, I recognize the work that the DOC's done, even for itself. Because right now, I'm a interim minister at one church, First Christian Church of Oakland, and I'm an associate minister at Tapestry Ministries in Berkeley. Now, these two churches, the African American churches, Tapestry is very diverse, a very diverse church. FCCO is not as diverse, but it's open to so much. And the more I experience these particular churches, the more I see they've done the work. Now, mind you, in Tapestry, they're so diverse that you're like, okay, we're good. But they represent a bridge. It's a bridge, because you have to have folks like Katy and others who are that bridge. Because I remember years ago, a pastor in Maryland, when I really started dealing with, I thought I was just going to be gay. Not against gay, but I didn't realize I was going to be transgender either. So, I always worked through my own stuff. He said, everybody can handle your truth. And I never forgot that. So you have to have folks either want to translate, to prepare the soil, so that when Jesus, I'm going to say the word Jesus, not me, so that when transformation does occur, the soil has already been put together and done, so you can have transformation. And so I love the parable of Jesus. I love the farm motive, where you have to prepare the soil. If you don't prepare the soil, you're not going to get very much. You can't. So when you have change coming in, because for me, faith is transformational. I think God is a God of transformation. God is a God of liberation. So he puts this God, I say he, but so God has us in these places, and every now and then God decides to disrupt our comfort. And sometimes it's not a pleasant place to be the one who's going to put folks in discomfort.
Yeah.
So you need folks like Katy and other allies to prepare the soil, to create a space by which LGBTQ and other parts of the alphabet to come in.
Yeah, it really sounds like trust has to be built from both sides, step by step. It's not just an overnight thing. It's not a, it takes time and it requires a great deal of intention. And Monica, you used the word grace earlier, and I feel like that's a completely beautiful word, because I think of when toddlers start to learn to walk and they fall down and they're wobbly. And it's like, whenever we as individuals or as communities, whenever we try to do something new or step into an area where we might not be comfortable, in order to grow, we're going to stumble and we're probably going to fall. And it's the grace, it's the continued grace that helps us to steady our feet one step at a time over time. So I have one last question, and Derek, you may have more questions, but here on Drinks with Amy, we're all about self-care and finding more and more ways to take care of ourselves as ministers, as people of faith, as these channels for love in the world. And so I'm just curious for both of you, for each of you, in this, you're kind of de facto activists, right? Like, that's kind of where you are. And so I'm just curious about, like, how do you take care of yourselves when you're in this, in this role of helping to build trust and allow for transformation and all of those different things? And also, when you come up against people who are just like, what? I don't know who wants to start, but again, this question on the level of self-care, like, how do you take care of yourself so that you can sustain this calling that you have?
You don't mind, Katy.
Go ahead.
Well, fortunately, being retired military, I have access to mental care professionals. I have a therapist, and I got a psychiatrist, but also I have my church, and people like Katy I can share and talk with. Mm-hmm. And I have one friend, mentor named Jonathan. He's a trans man. He's got to be almost 70 years old. And when I started this journey in Virginia, I said, I need one person to always tell me the truth. And I might fall on the floor and cry, but I'll get back up. But I need to, because my goal, and I get it from the Buddhist context, about balance. Mm-hmm. It's about balance. So, you don't know what's going on. You're doing this stuff one step at a time. And you got to find some way to balance the realities of your life in such a way that they're going to be productive. Because while I find my journey...
Can you say that again?
What did I do? Anyway, you got to balance it out. You got to balance the realities. Because by doing that, you're able to be productive. I think that's what I said. And then you recognize. Then for me, I have to recognize. I can't really see it far ahead. First of all, I really can't. I wish I could, but I can't. So for me, God is very, very a prayer life, a meditation life, centering myself in God. And sometimes you say those things so much it become like, yeah, okay, fine. But it's like eating. Yeah, okay, we eat every day, but if you don't eat, what happens? So you gotta have, for me as an activist and doing ministry, because I'm working at 2 churches, and I recognize that people are always, they want God, they want to be in Christ, but they may or may not know how or whatever. And so being able to have good relationships, for me, Christ-centered relationships, and then recognizing when God is sending somebody your way, or when you find yourself in a place like, hey, wait a minute, you're not alone. It may feel like it, but you're not alone. So that's kind of, and that's my self-care, and the practicalities of self-care enable me to really rest in God, I guess you could say. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that I'm not crushed down, whatever. what it does, I hope, is alive. And I read certain things. Right now I'm reading Dr. King's A Strength to Love, sermons. I read Howard Thurman. So the stuff that I take into my brain, it's about being positive stuff, good stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Katie?
Yeah, I would say find your tribe. Like, right, when we find our tribe, then we can, whether it's the club or the church or whatever it may be, and let those people take care of us, where we don't have to be on so much, as it can be a huge measure of self-care. So when we're going out and doing work with people who aren't necessarily our tribe, we have that care and support. And, I do things like get my nails done and take a day off and get away from social media. I'm not very good at that, but I do try, for a couple of hours at a time. But for me, my biggest act of self-care is to let go of fear. And when I'm able to do that, then I don't worry so much, because I know my biggest drain is worrying what everyone is thinking. I know I was preaching the Sunday. So Orlando on the West Coast, we found out like right before church, and we did prayers, but then it was the week later that was the Sunday, right, that was kind of dedicated to a more serious worship service that talked about Orlando, and I was preaching that day. I couldn't not talk about that this was an attack against the LGBTQ community. And I was just worried the whole day before and all during the service and then after. And so I asked some key people. I was like, was everyone okay? Did you notice people who were uncomfortable? And really, my fear was that they wouldn't like me. And one of the older women that I asked, she just took my hand and said, "Oh, that's really not for you to worry about, because you did what you were called to do." And I thought, oh, that was really, really helpful. And so just kind of every day, just thinking, I don't have to be worried about what people are thinking if I'm kind of doing what God is calling me to do, and doing it in a way that's I'm not going in kind of firestorm, but kind of planting the soil like Monica was talking about. And that's why she and I think, work so well together in our workshops and other stuff that we do together.
Awesome. Very good. Derek, do you have any final questions or?
No, I mean, we're getting just about time, and I feel like there's so much more that I could ask. And at some point in the future, I'd love to have you both back, because, Katy, you said something really interesting, that everyone has a gender journey, and I think that that's something that, for those of us who are cisgendered, that we don't think of ourselves as having had, or even needing to have had a gender journey, but I think that's really important. So I'd love to have you back to talk about that at some point, but I do know that we are short on time today, but as always, like, these conversations continue into the future.
Sure.
Yeah, I think of this as part one.
Yeah, definitely. I think, Amy, all of our conversations end up being part one.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what happens when we honor complexity.
Yeah.
Complexity doesn't lend itself to brevity at all. So, we use the time that we have, and going back to this idea of little bits and opening hearts and minds in little tiny steps over time. It's like in these 1 hour broadcasts that we have, that's 1 hour. That we can sort of bring a different perspective, or hopefully open some hearts and some minds. And, Monica, I really appreciate you reminding me of my own desire for decolonization of my own mind and my own heart, and the role that really plays in my spiritual direction practice, because that's pretty much the number one thing. That's kind of the number one result of my spiritual direction work. And so, I really appreciate you sort of bringing that word back into my vocabulary and just into my own sort of organization of that. So, yeah. Let's see. So we usually wrap up by sharing any projects or books or workshops that we have coming up. I am teaching a workshop a week from tomorrow in Kansas City called Yes and Improvisation as Spiritual Practice. So that will be at Plaza Wellspring in Kansas City. I'll post the link to the event, but that's very exciting. And I have 4 open spaces in my spiritual direction practice. So my website is amydianeshoemaker.com, and everything you need to know about it is there. Monica, what do you have coming up? Hold on, I can't hear you. Did you cover your microphone by chance?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the final edits for the book Autism and Imagination Face Oppression. The final edit will do 5th of July, and prayerfully will be out in fall.
Awesome.
And then also do work on the HIV and AIDS, and we have a conference on right in DC. That's kind of what I'm doing.
Awesome, cool. I'll send you a message about getting links and information about that stuff.
Okay.
Cool, thank you. Katie?
I would say I'm always wanting new people to interview, and the nature of this work is I can't just go up to someone and be like, "Are you a trans Christian?" People have to come to me. So if you want to come to me, the way to find me is transfriendlybible.blogspot.com, and that really it's a little out of it's being updated currently all the time. So there was a little gap this spring because I got really busy. And from there, I have a couple of articles, stuff like that coming out, and that's all available on there. And the email to reach me is transfriendlybible@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I just love to hear from people, and then I write back quickly.
Awesome. Thanks. Derek, what's up with you?
So something that has been developing from the UNCO community for the last couple of years that is finally starting to get some legs. We're working on creating a pastoral care safety net for pastors, for people who do ministry. Ministry is incredibly lonely, and we're trying to create a network of care and support for people who are doing ministry. If you are interested in that, you can find me on Facebook. You can send me an email at unburdened1@gmail.com, unburdened1@gmail.com. And we've got there'll be more solid coming soon, but we've got some really good things in the works now, and some folks who are actually, looks like, going to support our work. So excited about that, and really excited about being able to create a network of care for those of us who do the hard work of ministry.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that's everything. One final note, we won't be back in 2 weeks. We'll be back in 3 weeks. So instead of July 13th, we'll be broadcasting again July 20th. So just a mini summer break for us over here at Drinks with Amy. Again, thank you so much, Monica and Katy and Emily, for being with Derek and I tonight. And we really appreciate you and the work that you're doing, and we look forward to having you back on to continue this conversation. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
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 Good one.